Season 3, episode 4. We're almost at the halfway point entitled, And Now His Watch Has Ended. Pat, I'm not going to lie. I had a little bit of a you moment where I thought that this is one of those episodes where I thought it was going to be really awesome going in. And then coming out on the other side, I'm like, oh, this might not have been as good as I remember. There's a few awesome sequences in this episode, but overall, I don't know. What do you remember about this episode before we get into it?
Dom, I totally agree with you. Like when my watch was ended, at the end of this episode,
there it is.
I was glad to see the credits. I hopefully the Talkin TV's family sees it the same way. But listen, I agree with you. Cool sequences, but man, I was ready for that credit sequence.
Yeah, you and me both. All of that and more. Stay tuned, people. All right, Pat, season 3, episode 4, entitled And Now His Watch Has Ended, aptly titled after the Night's Watch phrase for whenever they lose a brother in the course of the action. But I think it's got a little bit of a double meaning just as far as, our lives just in general this past weekend. We're in October. We've got a lot of movies and just media content that has come back. We have got, oh man, we both had to sit through one shitbox Halloween movie. You watched the Ridley Scott's new movie, The Last Duel, which, oh man.
Hey, listen, The Last Duel is definitely up there above Halloween. So I recommend.
A lot of things are up above Halloween right about now.
Yeah, I would recommend that over watching the latest slasher film.
Look, Chris and I podcasted about that this morning, and it's bad when it's one of those podcasts where we're legitimately struggling to find something hard to say. And about the best amount of praise that I can heap that movie's way is, the kills were good, But we're not here to talk about that. I already wasted enough breath on that god-awful movie. We're here to talk about Game of Thrones, Pat. It also doesn't help that Succession Season 3 is premiering tonight, but I'm watching that afterwards. So, Pat, what do you remember about this episode? Because I really think that this is my first major case as far as this being one of those episodes that I remember really, or at least think I remember really fucking loving when I watch it the first couple times that I watched this show, because it has probably 3 of the best sequences of 3 of the best character cap-off arcs for moments that happen in Season 3 just in general. But the problem is that those moments all happen at the end of the episode, and the problem is there's still a full 30 to 40 minutes of episode to watch beforehand, and a lot of that stuff, some of it is cool, and there's some great dialogue, but a lot of it is really fucking boring up until that point.
Yeah, a lot of expletives there, Dom. Maybe you should back off the adult talk here. But, what I'm going to say is I agree with you. A lot of it is just simmering. A lot of things are simmering, and it's waiting till those big moments happen. And not to say that, the whole idea of the Hound being challenged to a duel, that whole sequence with Arya calling him out for running down the butcher's boy, that scene is pretty dope.
Awesome.
To be honest with you.
Great character interaction.
Like Arya just really starts to gain confidence and really, start to be a character that is growing into their own. So really fantastic there. What else happens in this?
Big 3 moments for me. Arya calling out the Hound and the reintroduction of Beric Dondarrion after his initial introduction in Season 1 when he was played by a different actor. That's number 1. Number 2, the Night's Watch kind of rebellion and cracking down on Craster's. That's still one of my favorite sequences in general.
Listen, the whole thing that goes down Craster's is amazing.
Amazing cap-off to that arc.
Yeah, the fact is Mormont really,
underestimated his people.
Unjust end, and he's going to have to be defended at some point. And luckily, Jon Snow convinces the Night's Watch to do so in a later season.
Right. And moment number 3, obviously, is, it's the sequence at the end. It's Daenerys bringing on the Unsullied, and then just Drogon. The first instance of her actually using the dragons in action.
Oh, yeah.
Not like in Karth. It's really well done. It's really justified. It's amazingly well filmed.
Yeah.
It's funny.
She's proving her advisors wrong, right?
Yeah.
They kind of questioned her the last time that we saw her, in that storyline. And basically, she proves to them right there, then and there, that she knew what she was doing. She was manipulating the situation so that she could just scream Dracarys and burn the master up. And
incredible cap off.
Now she has an army.
Yeah, incredible cap off to just an amazing 3 sequences. But so this is the second episode that's directed by, this is the first episode that's directed by series mainstay Alex Graves, who would direct a significant amount of the episodes in both season 3 and 4. He famously directs this episode of the next episode, Kissed by Fire. He directs the episode where Joffrey dies next season, The Lion and the Rose, as well as the episode that is the centerpiece for the battle between the Gregor the Mountain Clegane and Oberyn Martell next season, The Mountain and the Viper, as well as the season 4 finale. This episode is also written once again by Benioff and Weiss. And the thing about this episode is it seems to be that weird instance where it is both wrapping up a lot of the arcs that have been established from the first half of the season and also from the last episode, while also serving as the transition point, which is really weird because usually because we sort of got this in the last season as well with episode 4 in the last season, right? Garden of Bones. But the whole thing about that one is that one I think served as like this really nice, smooth transition into like where the rest of the season was going to go. Whereas this one, it almost feels like, okay, we're kind of biding our time, more talking, and then boom, all the action happens at the end. And it's like, oh, okay. And Eric, just kind of to address your point about this, I wouldn't say the word is boring. It's just the part that like, well, look, we made comments on the fact that like the King's Landing stuff this season has been very slow, very deliberately paced. You know, this episode, the other thing too about this episode is it doesn't have all of our focus characters. Like John's not in this episode, Rob's not in this episode. We still don't get that much with Stannis. Stannis pretty much sits out the first half of this season with the exception of a few key scenes. But it's like the thing I remember, and this is really where we're getting into it, I feel like now, is Storm of Swords really started to focus on the secondary characters in a way that the first 2 books did not. And we really start to feel it in this episode. And it's not that it's bad per se, but it's not yet at a point where we figured out like, okay, which one of these secondary characters are really going to be interesting and fascinating to watch, which ones of them are just kind of be there, to just to just take up time. So I guess we should just get started. But before we do get started,
you brought up Eric's comment in the chat there, and for the most part, I don't necessarily think that this is boring if you look at it from an analytical point of view, but for the most part, like this is like third, fourth time that I've seen this episode. It's like I'm basically have started binging some of the later seasons at the and. How fast paced season 7 and 8 become. It's one of those things where like the show is more economical later on in later seasons. So maybe from my perspective, my lens, this season's still part of the slow burn. You're not getting, action packed scene after action packed scene after action packed scene. Maybe that's just, sort of the perspective of what I'm used to binging some of the later seasons at this point. But, for the most part, this is definitely still a lot of setup. Which for the third season of the show, you would expect like a lot of the setup to have been rendered and some more action to take place. But I don't think we get that steady stream of action until probably season 4. Season 4 is when things really pick up, and almost every episode, there's still some lulls here and there, but like for the most part, you get some consistent bangers from season 4 onwards.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones as a whole is that Game of Thrones, aside from just being the pop culture beast that it is, Game of Thrones happened right when TV was in another transition period, right? Because near the end of Game of Thrones run is when you started to see the streaming services really start to pick up and really start to you saw the transition out of the prestige TV era that Game of Thrones kind of capped off and transition into more of the streaming era, more quick hits, more, shorter episode content, more hyper focus, more action happening in every episode. We started to be a lot more stringent about and less forgiving towards the long form setup stuff and more so towards like, okay, what can you give us kind of in the moment? And it's kind of interesting to see how Game of Thrones reflects that, because those earlier seasons, in comparison to some of those later breakneck pace episodes, it's really fascinating to kind of witness just, seeing that transition. So the only scene that I wanted to talk about kind of before we got into the bulk of the episode, because there's a lot of plot that happens in certain sections of this episode, is the one scene with Bran in the beginning. It happened so briefly that you could almost cut it from the episode and you wouldn't even realize it, but it's Bran having yet another dream about the Raven, right? He's running through the woods. Jojen's in the dream with him this time. Jojen tells him this time he's got to find it. He climbs up the tree to see the Raven. Catelyn comes out from behind a branch. Obviously, this is all a dream, but it's the whole thing where Catelyn is shaking him, pushes him off the branch. It's obviously supposed to be symbolic of the fact that, Bran's going to pursue this, but at what cost, at what expense, what is he going to lose along the way, right? And I guess I guess the thing that annoys me is this is the point where my brain is starting to get into that mode of, oh, this is kind of pissing me off how awesome this setup is, only for how it pays off later on, I don't know.
Because listen, the Bran storyline, like I think we talked about it plenty of times, where it is such a slow burn. It is really cool. Love everything about it. And then all of a sudden, it's just
peters off. Like he literally is not even in a whole. He's not even in a whole season of the show. They just sit out season 5 because they're like, oh yeah, Bran wasn't in that section. We don't really know what to do with him there. We're just going to cut him out just in general, And so I don't know, like that one sequence, it's like, oh, this is going to be that one. This is where it really starts, where we will get like these one scene check-ins with these characters that are just ultimately going to go nowhere, I think. But other than that, like I said, there is not to complain too much, but there is like a decent amount of like good stuff in this. Like our first arc with the Riverlands, Jaime and Brienne don't get as much screen time in this episode ultimately. But there's the opening scene I think is really, really awesome as far as like how it continues from the closing shot of the last episode where they're continuing their journey towards Harrenhal. Jaime's like just down in the dumps. He's got the hand strapped around his, they got the hand literally hanging around his neck as a reminder of what he's lost.
Well, I would imagine he lost a lot of blood too. So
yeah,
he's probably wheeling from the injury. And,
right.
So he's depressed. He's basically, has been injured. They probably cauterized that wound. He's also, I think at this point they talked, Brienne and him talk about the whole, fact that he was, saved her from, unfortunate assault. So, it's one of those things where like the scene is Jaime tries to escape, or at least try to fight back when he falls off his horse. And, essentially he can't do it. Like, obviously, he's too handicapped at this point to be able to fight at his former glory. And he's basically threatened and said, hey, if you ever try to do this again, we'll take your other hand.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of an interesting scene where it starts off, you think that it's just going to be another feigned escape attempt by Jaime. Instead, like his whole thing is he's trying to get water. Like he legitimately like is having a hard time standing. And then friggin' first they pour the water on him. Then Locke gives him actual horse piss to drink. And then he manages to grab the one guy's sword and almost fights his way out. It shows that it gives you that one brief moment of hope where you're like, oh man, is Jaime gonna make it out of this one? Because he's because even without his main fighting hand, he's still like almost even though the soldiers are clearly playing around with him, he almost like clearly shows like, yeah, he can still fight before Locke kind of knocks him out, kind of proves his fighting spirit. And it transitioned into this awesome scene that happens later on. It's one of those scenes that I keep forgetting about whenever I watch it, but it's honestly, it's so good. It's probably one of the best, like kind of most low-key forgotten scenes between Jaime and Brienne, where they're sitting around the fire later on, and she's like, what are you doing? He's just like dying. And then she's like, wow, so you lost the one thing that you think defines you. You actually have to be down in the dirt with the rest of us who get shit like the valuable shit taken from us all the time. You actually have to be one with us, with the commoners, and your first instinct is to give up and die. You sound like a woman. And it's so crass. It's so unexpected. Jaime's probably never heard anything like that in his life, but it's exactly the kind of kick in the pants that he needs in order to like kind of show that like, yeah, he's not out of the fight yet. It's so awesome the way that scene's written, and it's insane because
no, I agree with you, and it's one of those things like watching the later seasons, just how Jaime and Bronn interact with each other later on when Bronn is trying to get lands and castles and titles and whatnot. Jaime sort of basically uses the same sort of language. Hey, listen, it's like, you just do what I tell you and those things will come, and it's one of those things where there becomes this secondary way of looking at things. No matter how complicated the political situation gets, there is sort of this like crass, like this is the facts of life type of reality. And a lot of the characters, Jaime, Bronn, Brienne, etc., basically buy into this lingo and start talking about it. And I think that's part of what makes the show really good, is the fact that, no matter who's in power, people really do know how, bad the situation is, how wrong the situation is, you know, and it's to a certain degree, it's like there's nothing we can do about it until an opportunity comes, you know, upon us. So it's one of those things where, you know, this type of language, this scene, really keeps it real in this world, and I think that's one of the benefits of this show is that they kind of continue to do that throughout the seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible scene. Like I said, we don't spend too much time with them in this episode, but that one scene is like, oh man, this is one of those scenes for the ages. So I want to come back to the Arya scene a little bit because I kind of want to focus Arya in with like the last batch of like really awesome storylines that we have to cap off the episode. The only other quick storyline that I want to check in is the other storyline happening in the North, which again, it's really quick. But again, it is significant because, again, it's the payoff to what happened last episode, where last episode, Theon is freed by Ramsay, who makes him think that he's working with his sister. Takes him on this wild goose chase, right? They're walking around the woods. They're talking. Theon's still putting on the bravado face. Ramsay makes up this pretty well intricate backstory and really well thought out. I'm like, damn, how long has he been thinking about that? Like he had to have like been working on that for quite a little bit, or who knows? He may just be that good of an improv artist. He basically makes up this whole story of this whole made up backstory about how he was a boy growing up on Pike. His dad brought him out the day that Theon got sent away to the North and everything. And he's so good at his delivery that Theon buys it hook, line, and sinker. I'm just, in hindsight, it's one of those things where you're like, damn, Ramsay Snow, expert torturer, expert hound taker, and expert liar. Like that is, again, very slowly but intricately laying the seeds of just how good of liars and backstabbers the Boltons are. You know, it brings it back to the castle. Theon has no idea where he is, right? He had no idea where he was. He spent the last God only knows how many months strapped to that stupid friggin' wooden flayed man.
This is one of the greatest scenes ever because as soon as they walk into the room, it
becomes immediately apparent. Like,
you get the giant X and Ramsay smiling ear to ear, and essentially he's like, he escaped and I caught him. And immediately a bunch of soldiers pounce on him, and he's screaming, at the top of his lungs, that the torture is going to continue, because at the very end of this sequence, Theon realizes that he's been duped, and it's just part of the torture, and he's about to endure a lot more pain. Although at this moment, he probably does not expect the type of pain that we're going to see in the next episode, or maybe two.
Well, not next episode, but definitely in the next couple.
It's coming up.
It's coming. It's coming. Let's just say that Jaime's not the only one who loses a valuable bodily commodity this season.
Well, as they put it later in the series,
Theon's lost his favorite toy.
Yeah, Ramsay sends the letter and the box and said, "Hey, Theon has lost his favorite toy," which is it's so gruesome and so evil of Ramsay Bolton, the way he wears this and the way he taunts basically the Greyjoys at this point.
It's at this point, it's just a matter of, it's like, okay, so we know that he's just flexing. Like, Ramsay is not even doing this because he has to in order to like show that like the North is not lying down to the Ironborn. He's just doing this because he wants to, because this is the stuff that he loves doing. This is stuff that he relishes in. This is the stuff that for whatever reason, again, it gets him off for whatever reason. So
well, it has to do with the fact that the Boltons believe in fear and striking fear into their enemies, and the fact is, them sort of, doing bodily harm to one of the family members and sending the part to the other, to the other family members. It's one of those things that it's all about, fear and throwing them off their game. And it all comes to a head at the Battle of the Bastards when Sansa basically explains to Jon, like, hey, don't let him get in your head. Don't let
that's
him,
exactly what Jon does.
Yeah, don't let him make you do what he wants you to do. And, exactly. It's so Ramsay, from this moment early on in the series, relatively, in season 3, all the way up until season 6 with the Battle of the Bastards, he basically is manipulating people and getting them to really fight on his terms. And, it's one of his strong suits, although, unfortunately, he does get outsmarted in the end.
Yeah, but again, not by on behalf of John though. For me, the big takeaway from this scene is not anything to do with Ramsay though, because I feel like a lot of the stuff is already been pretty established as far as how the Boltons go, and like obviously this is kind of just the fulfillment of it. For me, the big takeaway is the moment with Theon, which is where Theon has this moment where, again, he's still putting on the bravado. He's still trying to be the Ironborn, trying to say, oh, I took Winterfell because I would have had no other choice. My father would have only had me raiding fishermen villages. How could I ever be like Rob? Whatever. He's still continuing with that bravado. And then he finally breaks down. And he finally lets the real person out. He's like, I kind of had, first when he tells Ramsay, and again, it's a very quick but brief but very telling scene, because this is where Ramsay finds out, oh, shit, Bran and Rickon Stark are still alive. We still might actually have a problem to worry about. What's it called? Once he finds out that the boys that Theon killed were not indeed Bran and Rickon, but were instead two farm boys. But the other big thing here is he admits is like, yeah, I betrayed my real father because Ned was more of a father to me than Balon ever was, And it's like, it's kind of the like self-reckoning moment. It's like everyone thinks that like, oh, Theon spends the next however many seasons it is, like kind of worrying about until he has that moment with Jon in season 7, that really, really awesome moment. But no, he has that moment of clarity first before he's kind of like, loses his way even more just in general. And I thought that was really kind of refreshing. And it's like, okay, it was nice to see that at the very least, he had some reckoning, some understanding before things just, before they just got so much worse for him just in general. But so next we have King's Landing, and we have a lot of trudging to get through in King's Landing because the stuff here is very slow, but very deliberate, and there are a lot of very specific seeds that are placed here that all come into play and later on as far as how the relationship between the Lannisters and the Tyrells is going to go. And it all surprisingly it revolves around Varys, which is a nice kind of surprising change of pace. Usually a lot of the King's Landing stuff is around Tyrion or Cersei or Tywin or Joffrey, or in this case, the Tyrells, the newest additions, obviously, to the King's Landing family, or Littlefinger. Obviously, Littlefinger is, progressively taking more and more of a backseat since season 1, but now we really get to focus on Varys, and we learn a lot about Varys in this episode in ways that we haven't before. I think this episode in particular is what really establishes where Varys' true allegiances lie, as obviously, which the subject of which has been murky the last couple episodes.
The main scene in this whole entire episode is him prying open the box and talking to Tyrion, right? He's telling him the whole idea of like, I don't believe in magic anymore, and so you can't imagine how relieved I was to fight Stannis and the Red Witch and all this type of stuff. And it's like, he explains the whole story about how I believe he was sold, right, and his captive decided to like cut him up for fun. And he talks about how he's waited all these years for revenge. And as soon as he gets the box open, it's like, well, here it is. This is my moment. I had, the person that I've been, basically desiring revenge upon, crated up and shipped over to King's Landing. And now I get to finally have my, moment of joy.
It's an awesome moment because it establishes kind of who Varys is as a character, where Varys, again, there's a reason why he has this constant back and forth enmity with Littlefinger, because the two of them essentially have kind of the same backstory. They're kind of opposite sides of the same coin. They're both grew up relatively lesser off. Littlefinger, obviously from a lesser house that nobody really knows or cares about. And Varys literally as a poor kid in the streets of, which one did he say? Which city did he say he was from? Lee, Smear, one of the two. I don't remember which one of the three cities he was from. Both kind of had to work and claw their way up and now hold extremely coveted positions of prominence right in the court. But because they came from that, they didn't come from the place of royalty, because they didn't come from these great houses. They have an understanding of the common people that a majority of the other high lords of Westeros, like even people like Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, would never have, ultimately. They understand the way that the common people think, and as a result, it kind of gives them a political leg up, an advantage over the rest of the lords and ladies in the kingdom. And it's one of the reasons why they're kind of able to like circumnavigate around to all the different houses in order to like kind of continue to play their games, ultimately, and continue to survive in the long term throughout the show. It's something that I never really picked up on while I was reading the books, but it's something definitely that the show kind of helped fill in for me, because Varys is all over the place playing games. He's talking to Tyrion, obviously. Tyrion, actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's really his only scene in that episode. Next thing you know, he's talking to Raz, trying to figure out more so what Littlefinger's up to. And Raz, again, proves to be very, very adept at helping him, and officially proves to Varys when Varys was unsure as to whether Littlefinger was still interested in Sansa. Roz basically confirms it. It's like,
I think this scene with Roz is, obviously it does have the plot points. Roz is giving Varys information, but it's also another fun scene. Like it's basically playing off the whole Podrick thing.
The Podrick thing. Then even Varys is confused. He's like, "Are we sure we're talking about the same Podrick Payne here?" I was like, "Oh, then yes, we're still doing it."
And then I think Varys goes, "Didn't Littlefinger get upset that there wasn't any money?" And Roz explains that he's too busy to even care. Yeah, and it's one of those things where
she continued to think it's like, wow, the girls would be secretive, and she said he was the best they've ever had, and they've had a lot of men. I'm like, wow, way to just keep rubbing it in. It's like, we get it, he's gifted.
Yeah, and that's a running joke for the rest of the series. Every time Podrick meets up with these characters like Bronn and stuff, but I think ultimately, using the whole Podrick thing is basically to make sure that the audience does not see the death of Roz coming, right? Because in this sequence, she's saying that, Littlefinger didn't really notice, like he's not really paying attention. He's got bigger fish to fry. So that gives a sense that this whole conversation between Roz and Varys is going, under the radar. And ultimately, in the end, we know where Roz's storyline ends. So it's one of those things where, like, Littlefinger might make you believe that he's not involved. That's one of his skills, is that, he might be playing the game, but you might not even know that this is something on his radar, that he's making these moves. And I think that's what ultimately will show how dangerous he is as we go through these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's continued in the next couple scenes, obviously, that Varys has with the Tyrells. Again, like there's a lot of stuff that happens in the King's Landing stuff, even though it is very deliberately paced, which is that, again, we're continuing the seeds of, like, these political games that we're seeing with the Lannisters and the Tyrells. It's so interesting to see, like, how the King's Landing stuff is played when they're not, like, in, like, active, like, kind of panic mode like they were last season, where again, it's like the complete opposite, where Ned Stark in season 1 was in King's Landing, had no freaking clue how to navigate around, had no idea what he was doing, and because we pretty much spent all the time with him, Sansa, and Arya, we really didn't get to know a lot of the political leanings of King's Landing the way that we did last season. Now this season, we know the Lannisters, we know what they're all about. We have the scenes with the Tyrells. We see kind of the games that they're playing back and forth, obviously. First, that whole sequence within the Sept, right, with the discussion between Olenna and Cersei, while Joffrey is just showing off everything to Marjorie. Marjorie's continuing to, play to Joffrey's every aim and will, but Cersei's continuing to prove very, very suspicious of the Tyrells, especially when Marjorie manages to get Joffrey to actually go out and confront the common people in front of the Great Sept of Baelor, something that she obviously, does not want to happen, because she wants to keep Joffrey protected, because the last time they were in front of the people of King's Landing, they wanted to, murder them all because they were starving. Then you obviously have the scene where Varys visits Olenna, and it's very interesting to see where the seeds pop up, because the interesting thing is that, were the Tyrells planning on snatching Sansa out from the Lannisters' grasp before Varys broached the idea with Olenna? We don't know. But the interesting thing that happens here, again, after a hilarious introduction, one of my favorites, once again, just to see with Olenna roasting one of her many granddaughters and nieces, basically roasting the purpose and relevancy of their entire house. She's like, growing strong. If I have to see another golden rose, I might lose it, and she kind of gives a comparison of House Tyrell to the rest of the houses, like, wow, Krakens and direwolves, big strong beasts, but a golden rose, no one fears that, no one takes that seriously.
Well, it's also about the phrasing, right? Like, cool sayings, like winter is coming,
winter is coming,
so
hear me roar.
It's one of those things where they're basically playing into the material, the obviously the show and how it's written. At the same time, they're really making this character, just like intelligent, just self-aware, just realizing, where their position is and like what they have to do to really get a leg up on their competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Varys comes in. I love this interaction. It's incredible. Every single scene that Diana Rigg is in this entire show, she just owns. Absolutely 100%. Like, she even already makes enemies with Cersei when I don't even think she's quite yet at the point of just straight up insulting Cersei the way that she is in later seasons, where Freaking, she comes in and embarrasses us like, the city is made brighter by my presence. Is that your attempt to seduce me? And he's like, I don't know if you call it that. And he's like, oh no, seduce away. It's been so long. But then again, I don't know what happens if, what you get when you bump the decrepit up against the non-existent. I'm just like, God damn. I'm like, would she, how is she just that good of an actress that she's able to deliver those lines with just absolutely like no pause or a doubt or hesitation whatsoever? It's incredible. But so they have this walk and talk. Ultimately, they're feeling each other out. Olenna doesn't quite trust or know Varys very well. Varys is kind of throwing himself out there, making himself a little bit vulnerable, bringing up his thing with Littlefinger, how dangerous he thinks Littlefinger is. I find that ironic too, because again, Olenna is so smart that she ends up kind of taking advice from Varys and Littlefinger, where she takes Varys' advice ultimately for Loras Tyrell to marry Sansa and get Sansa away from the Lannisters ultimately, because he thinks that the Lannisters are getting too much power. And obviously he knows, everyone knows Robb is on the chopping block. It's a matter of when, not if he's losing. So he knows that Sansa is ultimately next. There's a reason why the Lannisters still want to keep her so close, even though she's not marrying Joffrey anymore, because she's still very valuable in that sense. The Tyrells have definitely picked up on that in some sense, even if they haven't necessarily put their plans in motion yet. There's a reason why Marjorie's been getting so close to Sansa so recently. And Varys ultimately kind of plants the seed. But Olenna also later teams up with Littlefinger to assassinate Joffrey. So like Olenna's another one where again she is on no one's side but her own. She plays the game exactly in order to benefit her, and the seed is planted here, and it's continued in the next scene with Marjorie continuing to buddy up with Sansa, and she even broaches the idea. Again, it's very intricate. It's all completely dialogue based, but it's very interesting kind of how all the seeds are placed, unfortunately. And it's ironic too, because Littlefinger is the one who kind of unravels the whole thing by leaking the Tyrell plot to the Lannisters and ultimately forcing their hand as far as them creating the arranged marriage between Tyrion and Sansa later on this season.
Yeah, it's one of those things where just watching the characters exist in King's Landing and realize that they're at a stalemate, and that for the most part they're just trying to do whatever they can to edge the other family out. This is very interesting to watch over these episodes, and really it kind of continues for the next couple seasons. Evolves into the whole what is it, the religious order, and
the Sparrows.
Yeah, how Cersei sort of involves them, and then it kind of backfires, and both families have to sort of deal with that. So there is, from this moment up until that sort of explosion, I believe it's in season 6. Basically this back and forth, just this minor tit for tat type of action between the two families, and it's all very subtle. It's all very like backroom deal type of scenarios, and it just lasts for the next couple seasons. Like the Tyrells and the Lannisters are trying to get a leg up on one another for the next couple seasons, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one other real scene that I wanted to tackle in the King's Landing stuff this episode, and that's the meeting between Cersei and Tywin, which is, again, another small fleeting moment, but again, some brilliant character work, some brilliant writing here, where Cersei is trying to accomplish two things here. She's trying to voice to Tywin that she can actually be like a legitimate help to him, and that he should take her more seriously. And also that, and also obviously voicing her suspicions about the Tyrell. Obviously, we know that Tywin has the same thoughts, obviously, but Tywin also, again, is a lot smarter than Cersei and understands that they still need to play up to the Tyrells, both because of the advantage that they provided them in the fight against Stannis, and also because, they're kind of, in desperate need financially for the Tyrells, because even though Tywin hasn't revealed it yet, the Lannisters are not doing so well money-wise, just in general. They've got this gigantic monstrosity of a wedding to pay for. They're in debt to God only knows how many other people. They're still technically in the middle of a war. It's just a mess all around. So Tywin understands that greater need. But I love the line too, where Cersei's like, "What happened to Jaime? Are we doing everything that we can?" And Tywin's like, "Well, when Catelyn Stark kidnapped Tyrion, what did I do?" And she's like, "You started a war." And she's like, "I did. And if I'm willing to do that for that lecherous little stump," I believe is how he refers to Tyrion, "imagine what I'd be willing to do for Jaime." I'm like, Jesus Christ. What the
it's also,
this episode?
Tywin also talks Cersei down, basically says, I've always hated the fact that you think you're smarter than you.
Yeah,
actually are.
well, there's something more so along the lines of like,
yes.
you're a lot less smart than you think you are. She's like, Marjorie's gotten her claws all in Joffrey. It's like, good, maybe she'll control him in a way that you didn't, and she's like, maybe you should like control him. But like, I love kind of the bar back and forth. Like Tywin does like kind of throw her a bone a little bit, where he's like, all right, fair enough, counsel, before he like kind of takes her down a peg and kind of makes her understand just how out of her depth he is. Again, not a whole lot of stuff, but slowly sowing the seeds for what's going to come with the disaster of Cersei ruling, ultimately later on, or attempting to rule, as we come to find out. So that's really it for like the majority of the stuff. So now we can get into the good stuff in this episode, because again, the last 10 to 15 minutes of this episode, friggin' bangers. Like bangers from minute 1 to minute 0. So we start north of the wall. Again, the Night's Watch, they're back at Craster's. It's a humorous scene. Of course, Gren and Ed shoveling shit, but Rast continuing to sow the seeds of doubt, where Rast is like, what's it called? Continuing to complain about Craster, saying that he's got more food, that he's not letting them on, that'll cut their throats in their sleep, and also that the Lord Commander has led them astray. He's like, he led us to the fist of the first man, and look what happened. Basically, again, we're continuing to see the seeds of doubt continuing to fracture the Night's Watch. Again, they are out of their debt. They're trying to get back to the wall. They're starving. They don't know what's going on, just in general. They're just trying to survive. There's been a lot of doubt that's been thrown on them, right? And, Gren and Ed are still remaining loyal, but again, it's precious few of them that are left that are actually still loyal to Mormont and his cause. Sam is once again continuing to buddy up to Gilly, but Gilly is not having any of it. Gilly's whole thing is, it's like,
doesn't she go, I don't want your stupid
I don't want your stupid
at some
thimble.
point.
It's like, I don't have time for like childhood memorabilia in general. It's like, I have my son to worry about, and my only priority right now is keeping him alive, because for all we know, tomorrow he could be given to the White Walkers, and she knows that to some extent. But we cut to inside, and oh man, like, just Pat, give us the breakdown of this scene, because it is from the minute, obviously, again, like we have the back and forth between Craster and Mormont, which is amazing. Again, like Mormont saying we'll move on once we've once we've healed our wounded, and he's like, if it were up to me, leave them here, I'll take care of them. Best be out with, like, Craster does not want them here, but that's, again, there's a second motive here. Craster knows that like these guys are hungry, these guys are impatient, these guys are miserable, and he also knows that they outnumber him heavily. So
it's one of those things, like, I was talking about it last episode, like, the only reason why Craster let them in is because he saw mutiny on their faces immediately, and
right,
he didn't, he was hoping that they would come in, they would have a good meal, a good rest, and move on, and that he wouldn't have to deal with them. But unfortunately, it just, like, it gets to the point.
Really
where these
quick.
Men decide to mutineer. And,
I mean, it also doesn't help too that they just had a funeral for a brother, and it didn't help that Mormont couldn't even remember where he was from. That definitely didn't do Rast any favors, just in general. Like, Rast is done with the Lord Commander. He is pissed off. He's miserable. You can tell because Rast was the guy in season 1 that was like the only guy that wouldn't get on Jon's side when obviously they were first bringing Sam into the fold, just in general, and they kind of had to use Ghost in order to get him on their side. And Rast has obviously been trying to go after Sam. Just as something to like kind of pick on him. You can tell Rast is a bully figure, and the problem is that in this type of area, the bully figures turn to killing quickly. Well, obviously, when we see Carl Tannen come in and be like, "Whose throat are you gonna cut, old man?" And it so quickly devolves. It so quickly devolves that it devolves into an argument. Next thing you know, Carl, Tannen baits Craster easily, and again, it's this old, very heavy set, out of shape fat guy with an axe versus, as we later find out about Carl, one of the most experienced cutthroats in King's Landing. He calls him a bastard. He charges him, pulls out the knife, jams it right in his chin. It's a brutal fucking kill, right? Mormont tries to say something about, you've cursed us with the gods and everything. And again, some very subtle foreshadowing here where Mormont quickly brings up the whole what's it called? The God's right thing or whatever, where basically the idea being that in the olden days, in medieval times, the whole thing is that if you were accepted as a guest under someone's roof, you would be protected from murder or betrayal or death under guest right privileges, essentially, is the word that you go for. And Mormont brings that up. Obviously, again, that's famously brought up later on when the phrase famously betray and murder Robb and Catelyn at the Red Wedding, definitely, because that's another thing that's seriously broken. And Bran even brings up a story in the finale of, as to somebody in their past who suffered from that same fate when they broke guest rights privileges and murdered somebody under their roof, which is that, what's it called? But of course, Tannen brings up there are no laws beyond the wall, old man. Mormont, poor Mormont. Mormont does not know when to quit when he's ahead. He brings up his sword and Rast stabs him, and it's a full-on mutiny. Gren attacks Carl. Ed gets into a fight with the other brother, and it's just pandemonium. Night's Watch brother fighting Night's Watch brother.
Who survives this? Basically,
I don't know.
Well, Sam and Gilly.
We know that Sam and Gilly do. Gren and Ed do, because they come back next season famously. And Dolores Ed makes it all the way up until the battle with the Night's Watch in the Long Night in the last episode. Gren famously dies in the Battle of the Wall next season in season 4, but they make it. But yeah, I have no, aside from the brothers who survived with Tannen and Rast, who are murdered by Jon and his party when they go north to avenge Mormont in the next season. I don't know like what's going on, but the whole thing is Sam knows exactly what happens here. He runs to Gilly. He's like, look, Craster's dead. We got to go now or else we're going to die. And they run off into the night. It's an amazingly well done scene. I think, and again, the writing up to it, the tension is fantastic. Once the action actually breaks out, again, it's very small and clustered, but you can just tell. It's one of the things where it's like, you can just tell pandemonium all around. And that's something that Game of Thrones, it's one of the action sequences that early Game of Thrones, I should say, did really, really well. I still remember this being one of the most harrowing scenes in the book, because this scene also came after there was, funnily enough, so in the book, after the initial attack at the Fist of the First Men, the Night's Watch brothers are on their way back, right? Sam is actually being helped out by another nicer brother who's not brought up in the show at all, who attempts to carry him, and then they get attacked by White Walkers again, and there's even more brothers who die, who die there, you know? And so you have that, which also leads into the whole, kind of rebellion at Craster's in general that results in Mormont's death. And the way that Mormont dies, too, is really fucking gruesome, too, where Mormont, for a second there, you think that Rast didn't hit anything vital, because he grabs Rast by the throat, slams him against the wall, and seems to be strangling him, doing well, but all of a sudden he just coughs blood all up, realizes, goes down, then Rast is on him, like stabbing him multiple times. You don't know where, but it's just one of those things where there's a reason why they keep Mormont off screen, because you can just tell it is brutal, definitely. Like 2 absolutely brutal deaths for this episode as well. We haven't even gotten to the main one. So, Eric Locke is the one who ends up getting killed, getting his neck snapped by Hodor in season 4 when they go back to avenge the rest of the brothers. So now we cut to the Arya scene in the Riverlands, which it's another transition and into next episode. But this scene is awesome.
Well, yeah, it's basically a trial of the Hound, you know.
Right.
It's, they try to get him on other causes, like, hey,
right,
didn't you do this? And it's like, no, I never did that. You know, I did that in the name of Joffrey.
Right.
Like, that was my job, and
what's interesting about how
princely things.
Well, what's interesting about how it first starts off is it starts off with Thoros and Angai. First, they're trying to just sling it on him that, because he's a higher born person and everything. That's what, that we're trying to take it out on you. And the Hound is like, you're no better than me. You're just a bunch of killers and Smiths and Tannins. You think you're fighting for glory and all that. Then Thoros is bringing up everything about the Targaryen babes and the Mummers Ford and everything. And the Hound is like, look, if you got something to say to me or kill me, get on with it. But don't call me a murderer for stuff that I didn't do. And don't try to place me in places where I wasn't there, because I wasn't at the Mummers Ford and I wasn't there when they killed the Targaryen babes. That was my brother.
Well, yeah,
and you know that. They're basically trying to hold the Hound culpable for his brother's activities. Basically, they're essentially being like, okay, we can't get the main Clegane that we want, but hey, we got the other Clegane who's done maybe half as much bad shit, so hey,
that's one of the things. Like, he basically tells them, like, I never seen a Targaryen baby, like I never seen one.
In King's Landing at the time when obviously the whole sack of King's Landing happened originally.
So no matter what, like, whatever mock trial they have him on, like, we really want to get you. Nothing is sticking. Like, Clegane is basically fighting off all the accusations,
right,
and the only one that sticks is when Arya stands up and says, hey, what about the butcher's boy?
Yeah.
And everyone jumps on and basically says, hey, that's
kind of funny that I guess I should say something about just how efficient the Brotherhood is when Arya is the one that actually has to point out the one legit thing that the Hound did. But it's also ironic because she would be the only one that would be able to place it. But again, we also get the introduction to probably one of my favorite secondary Game of Thrones characters, and that would, of course, be Beric Dondarrion, another famous Game of Thrones recast. He was portrayed for one episode by a different actor in season 1, but he is now portrayed by Richard Dormer, who portrays him this season, and then when he makes his comeback in season 6, portrays him until the end of the show. Beric Dondarrion, a character who famously, was a Stormlands Lord, served under Robert Baratheon, fought with Robert Baratheon, was famously sent by Ned along with Thoros in order to originally, bring out justice to the Mountain back in season 1 before the whole war started, before obviously the rebellion in King's Landing happened, and obviously, we saw the side switch, and the Brotherhood was, kind of became the outlaws and the criminals when they were originally sent to dole out the justice. And even though it's not explicitly said here, we obviously learn later on that Beric, again, has rededicated himself to the Lord of Light, because famously, in the however much time it's been since when he originally departed King's Landing versus now, he has famously been killed 6 times. And we don't find that out until later on, but he has been killed 6 times. He got an eye patch in place of an eye that got stabbed. He's got a mark around his neck from where he was once hung. He's been stabbed, like beheaded. Well, I don't know about beheaded, but the point being is this guy has died and come back to life alive. And it's interesting because Beric and the Hound, they definitely have some background. They have some camaraderie, right? The Hound knew both him and Thoros from his time spent in King's Landing. But this is, it's interesting kind of the relationship that's formed here where, again, the Hound and Beric are kind of two sides of the same coin, where, again, the Hound only does what he does, how they start off. Like, the Hound only did what he did, you know, obviously from his place of employment, but also because, again, he kind of delighted in the killing, and Beric, you know, kind of views himself as like this Robin Hood, this protector of the innocent figure. But it's very clear that it's very unorganized. Beric probably doesn't leave the cave too often. He probably doesn't go out with Thoros and the rest of them too often. He doesn't really know what he's doing. They know they just got a big figure with the Hound, but they don't actually really have anything on him until Arya brings up the whole Butcher's Boy thing from the second episode of the show. And you think for a moment, it's like, holy shit, is the Hound actually going to get his? And it's this really awesome setup for what's going to happen next, as far as, okay, trial by fire time, literally, you know?
Well, yeah, you know, obviously we'll talk about this when the fight happens, which, if I remember correctly, it was only an episode away. You know, I don't think it waits too much longer. Yeah. But
let's just say the next episode is one that I've very much been looking forward to.
Yeah, so the main thing is, you know, this setup and the whole idea that he's going to do a trial by combat. You know, it sets up the whole idea that, you know, of the Lord of Light at this point. You know, it's one of those things, like, the end result is going to show us that the Lord of Light is not just Melisandre, it's not just the, you know, the Red Witch, that it exists across the world, you know, and here's another pocket, you know, that exists of it. And so I think that's the most interesting thing. It kind of allows the Hound to be morally set free from, like, previous, you know, possible wrongs that he's been a part of. It allows him to be more of a moral character, and the fact that he and Arya start to roam the land, and he protects her, and ultimately he'll try to protect you know, either you know, Stark, you know, woman, you know, Sansa or Arya. You know, it kind of sends him on that trajectory of getting as far away from the Lannisters as possible, and really doing the right thing. You know, he's on that sort of, you know, that storyline, that progression, where he's now going to fight on the side of good, so to speak. Yeah,
definitely. It's definitely the beginning of that arc. Like I said, season 3 for me really is where a lot of the arcs for some of our favorite characters in the later seasons, like Jaime, the Hound, what's it called, Theon, all their arcs really truly do begin here. You know, these were at the point where all these characters, they were kind of just setups, right? Theon, Jaime, the Hound, just for example, a lot of those characters were kind of just background characters. They didn't have super much to do in those first couple seasons, but this season is really where we get to know them personally. You know, Sam as well. Eric, I love Eric's comment, Kiss by Fire. That's a cool one. It's the bath episode, basically, one in an actual bath, one in a cave. Yeah, pretty much, because next episode, again, it's Jon and Ygritte's bath scene. It's Jaime and Bran's bath scene when they're in Harrenhal. It's the Karstark Revolution at River Run, and then obviously it's the trial by fire, literally, which with Beric and the Hound. It's all those events are in next episode, and I'm super looking forward to it. We got one more event, obviously, that wraps up this episode, and oh man, Pat, I had been waiting for this moment, both in my original run of the show. I had been looking forward to this moment, like when we started this rewatch. There's an argument to be made that this is top 5 moments of the entire show. It's so funny, too, because this moment is so awesome that they literally replicated almost beat for beat in the Battle of the Bastards later on in season 6, when Daenerys unleashes the dragons in full force. They burn down the ships, and then obviously when they're coming towards Westeros and the dragons are flying overhead. But the seeds are sowed here where, again, it's the closing minutes of the episode. Daenerys arrives in Astapor. She's ready to make the deal with the slavers. She's got the dragon. She's giving it over to him. And again, like she pulls the biggest bait and switcheroo ever, where again Missandei is translating all this stuff, and you can just tell like Daenerys has had enough of this guy. Like Daenerys is not listening to this guy. She doesn't care. She's ready to go. She's locked and loaded. She hands it the dragon. She makes sure you can see the looks written over Jorah and Barristan's faces. They're like, this is a mistake, and she makes sure she knows. She's like, is it done? Are they mine? He's like, yeah, they're yours. But Drogon's still not responding. He's not responding. And so she obviously, orders them in Valyrian. Or no, she doesn't order them in Valyrian. She orders them in a different language at first. Then she speaks in Valyrian to Krasnus, revealing that she's been able to understand him the entire time, all while he was throwing those awful expletives at her.
Yeah, it's her native tongue, she says.
But, she's like, I have the blood of old Valyria in me. Of course I know how to speak Valyrian.
So I think this is one of the big things is like she's handed this whole thing and it's like, yeah, they're in my control. And she does the whole thing where she tests. It's like, hey, Unsullied, march forward, and they take a couple steps and it's like halt, and she's testing her power. And now that she has it, she essentially, makes it clear that she understood the whole game the whole time. But then she just gives an order to the Unsullied. It's like, kill
all the masters, kill the soldiers, kill everybody. And it's so weird too, because even though I know, but again, I don't know, because in hindsight, obviously after having watched the finale, it's crazy to me how this scene was so warped from its inception, where in the moment we're all rooting, we're cheering. She's like, yeah, kill the slavers, kill all the evil people, kill the guy, that stupid asshole that was hurling all those expletives at you because you thought that you couldn't understand him. Like when Drogon burns that guy in the moment, it's fucking awesome. And he's coming around and he's burning all the banners, and the Unsullied are killing all the slavers, and you're cheering because you're like, yeah, this is good triumphing. But again, it's one of the things where even with how awfully executed the finale is, there are still the seeds there of greatness, where now, because of what happens in that finale, awesome sequences like this are totally reverted in 180, where now you're seeing them in an entirely different light, where that shot of the the upward shot of Daenerys, the low shot of Daenerys as the dragon fire is going up around her with Drogon lighting shit up around her, that it has a totally different meaning in this instance.
Well, I feel like, after watching the entire series almost again, it's like
you're almost like, oh no.
The fact is, Dracarys is one of the Deus Ex Machinas of this show. Like anytime that she's in trouble, it's like Dracarys, and like 9 times out of 10, it saves her.
Sometimes it's awesome. Sometimes it's like, okay, really.
Yeah, but in its sense, like it totally makes sense, because the dragons are the power that she relies on, and that's what gives her advantage over everything else. But it's almost like her plot lines are somewhat razor thin, and the dragons literally are the only thing that she relies on. So it's one of those things, like sometimes a moment like this where she's just like, Dracarys, mic drop, it's over. It's one of those things where the show should have been a little more careful to not overdo that, because we just saw her do the same trick with the warlocks in the last season,
right?
And now she's doing it here with the, and it's like, anytime that she gets into real trouble, she just said Dracarys, and boom.
I mean, I guess the good thing is that I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we don't hear Dracarys again until Battle of the Bastards, and we only get it again in the ones in season 6 through 8. But I believe that this is really like the first major time that we hear it before the Battle of the Bastards. But again, the big takeaway again is, I'm like, my only real point is, I'm like, okay, like she was all about freeing the slaves and the soldiers, but like she had them kill the soldiers too. Like the soldiers, she could have given the soldiers a chance to run. Like they were probably, the soldiers really are not that much higher up than the Unsullied just in general. But the other thing too, obviously the point to take away is the fact that she famously, after the massacre is done, she famously tells the Unsullied, she's like, yeah, you're all free. Will you fight with me as free men, not as slaves? And it's the Spartacus moment, and she's very much like, okay, any man who does not want to fight is free to go home, but they're all with her. They're all massively indebted to her for freedom, obviously. And again, you get this really cool moment in the next episode, briefly, when we meet Grey Worm for the first time, where again they express kind of how in debt they are to her. And for me, the big moment, obviously, in the moment, not obviously, ignoring the next couple seasons. The big moment for me here is the fact that this is truly, again, where her identity is born. This is, okay, after all the abuse and all the harshness that she's suffered, all the misdirects that she suffered in the first 2 seasons, this is finally her moment. She's finally coming into her own. She's finally really starting to break the wheel. as far as like breaking down the systems that have held like kind of the lower classes as being oppressed for so long. Ultimately, this is that moment, and in the moment, it's freaking awesome. But that's the problem with revolutionaries that I find, is that revolutionaries usually are only at their best when the revolution is actually happening, and once it's over, you find them pretty much settling into kind of a lot of those same positions that they were trying so hard to break down in the first place. It's kind of funny how that works in hindsight.
This particular moment, fulfills her as a, thoughtful and effective leader. Like, she basically planned this ruse all by herself. Her advisors were in the dark, and basically, she knew when to stay steady with the plan and how to execute it. And, at the end of the day, at the end of this episode, basically, she has gone from, just that young girl who had some, a random claim on the throne to a viable leader with an actual claim to the throne, and maybe the intelligence to actually do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's again, bringing it back to my point above, and an absolutely amazing 3 sequences to cap off a pretty slow and deliberately paced episode. Again, it's another one of those episodes that I talked about in the first season where it seems to be more so character focused, but the problem is the awesome, like, big story moments that happen in this episode are so freaking awesome, but they don't quite make up for the rest of the episode ultimately. So that was it. That was our coverage of season 3, episode 4, and now his watch is ended. We'll be back next week for the midpoint. Again, we are just banging these episodes out just in general, because next week is the midpoint of season 3, episode 5, Kiss by Fire. One of my favorite episodes of the show. One of, in my opinion, the best episodes of the show. There's a lot of big moments that are happening, and it's all happening next week. Pat, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, Dom, you can find me on the Talkin TV network here, just Talking Thrones, doing this thing. And, again, I've been saying this since the very beginning, but I do have an Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, and I sometimes dream of posting on it. But one day you might actually see that dream become a reality. So, hey, maybe take a look there if you're interested.
Yeah, maybe, definitely. And of course, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, but more importantly, Facebook and Instagram at Talkin TV Podcast, where I post every single day, twice a day. Again, we've got so much content for you guys coming this week. We got our delightful Halloween Kills review this Monday. This Wednesday, we've also got the wrap-up to our Halloween Shocktober event, first-time watch series. We will be ranking all 12 Halloween movies. Oh, man, this is a ranking that I have been looking forward to, and it's always keep coming back for more incredible content on the Talkin'
the one with Busta
channel.
Rhymes is the one.
Oh, it's
like
amazing,
the best, right?
Oh, it's amazing. Oh, I love that movie so much. Pat, I need everybody to tune into this list just to understand, because you guys think that my rankings before have been infuriating. You guys are not ready. This is going to be the most infuriating ranking for you guys that I have ever done, just in general, and I cannot freaking wait, because like the Fast and Furious movies, I'd seen all those movies before. I kind of had an idea. It was mostly just kind of ironing out what the official order was for the franchise, but this friggin' one, oh man, you guys think I've been filled with hot takes before? Heads are gonna roll. So definitely tune in this coming Wednesday for the ranking of every single
years of
movie.
Research have gone into Dom's review here.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Definitely take a look.
Absolutely, years of research. I've totally dedicated years of my life, all of the last 4 since I watched the first Halloween movie. But of course, continue to support this channel by clicking the subscribe button, clicking the like button, clicking the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. As always, people, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week.
And our recap has ended.